Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today we're going to be talking about this year's longlist for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. So as I said in my predictions video on Monday, the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction is my favourite literary prize. I follow along with it every year. I've been doing this for several years and I tend to try and read the whole shortlist and as much as I can from the long list, and I really enjoy it. The Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction is, as it says on the tin, a prize for historical fiction. To be eligible for the prize, the book has to be set mostly 60 or more years in the past, and it has to be written by an author from the UK, Ireland, or the wider Commonwealth. And I really love the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction, and the longlist has been announced today. I haven't looked at the longlist yet. I thought I would do this while talking to BookTube. I did, however, see the headline in the bookseller newsletter this morning, so I do know that one of my guesses was correct. There were only 2 names in the headline, so we'll see what is on the rest of the long list. I'm going to have a quick look at the long list now, and then I will probably go away and do a tiny bit more research on the books, and then film more on this video and talk about my thoughts on the long list and my reading plans as well. Okay, so here is the long list for this year's Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. The New Life by Tom Crewe, which I have read and predicted would be on the long list, feeling very proud of myself about that. A Better Place by Stephen Daisley. Hungry Ghost by Kevin Jarrett Hussain. For Thy Great Pain Have Mercy on My Little Pain by Victoria Mackenzie. Another one that I have read and that I predicted would be on the long list. Again, feeling very pleased with myself about that. Also very nice to see it on there. Music in the Dark by Sally Magnuson. Cuddi by Benjamin Myers. I haven't read that one yet, but I did predict it would be on the long list. My Father's House by Joseph O'Connor. The Fraud by Zadie Smith. Another one that I haven't read, but that I did think would be on the long list. Master Timeless Blythe by Alan Spence. The House of Doors by Tan Thuong Eng. In the Upper Country by Kai Thomas. And Absolutely and Forever by Rose Tremaine. Right, very exciting long list here. I'm quite proud of myself that I managed to predict 4 out of the 12 on the long list, and I'm pleased that I've already read 2 of the long list. I am going to go and do some more research and make sure I know a bit more about these books, and then I will talk through the long list and my thoughts. Right, so I've done a bit more research, I know a bit more about these books, and I have started to think about my reading plans for the next few months, reading along with the Walter Scott Prize long list. So let's go through the long list one by one. I think it's alphabetical order by author. I think that's what the Walter Scott Prize did, so I'll just follow their order. And we'll start off with The New Life by Tom Crewe. Now, as I said, this is one of the books on the long list that I've already read. I love this book. I'm really pleased to see it on the long list because I think it's fantastic. So The New Life is by Tom Crewe, who's a British writer. It's published by Chatto and Windus, and it's set in late Victorian Britain, and it's about 2 men who, for various reasons, come together to write a book about homosexuality in the 1890s, at a time when this is very taboo, and kind of in the run-up to the Oscar Wilde trial. I thought this was such a fantastic book. The characterization, the writing, the complexities of the issues described, I just thought it was so good. And I also thought this conjured up late Victorian Britain so well. Last year I spent a lot of time reading new women fiction from the late 19th century, and I've been thinking a lot about how the late Victorian period is this time where there's this tension between all these new ideas and this feeling of more social liberation, but also the reaction to that, and what a thin line it was. And I feel like The New Life kind of explored all of that in a really wonderful way. So I just really love this, and yeah, I'd highly recommend it. Very pleased to see this on the long list. Next, we have A Better Place by Stephen Daisley, who is an author from New Zealand, and this is published by Text Publishing, who I think are an indie press based in Australia. This book is set in the 1940s and begins in New Zealand, and it's about 2 twin brothers who go off to fight in the Second World War, and only one comes back. And it's about how the experience fighting changes that one twin, I think. This sounds really interesting to me. I've read plenty of things set in the Second World War, but never anything about people from New Zealand in the Second World War. I do think this will be the hardest book for me to get hold of because it is published by an Australian indie publisher. It does look like I can get hold of the ebook in the UK, so maybe I'll read that. I think this is probably not at the top of my reading list, but definitely one I'm interested in. Then the next book on the list is Hungry Ghost by Kevin Jarrett Hussain, who is an author from Trinidad and Tobago. This book is published by Bloomsbury, and it's set in the 1940s in Trinidad, and it's about the kind of tensions between 2 different families. One family who are very wealthy, one family who live in poverty. And this book kind of follows what happens when one of the wealthy people disappears and how that event impacts the two families and the whole community. This sounds really, really interesting, and I'm very excited to get to this one. It's definitely one of the books that is highest on my list from the long list. I actually included this in my like most anticipated historical fiction releases for 2023 video back in the start of 2023, and as often happens with my yearly anticipated releases video, I haven't read it since, but I think it sounds really, really good. I've just reserved this at the library, so hopefully I'll get to this one pretty soon. Then next up we have For Thy Great Pain Have Mercy on My Little Pain by Victoria Mackenzie, who's a British writer, and this is published again by Bloomsbury. This book is set in 15th century England, and it follows the intersecting lives of two real historical figures, Marjorie Kempt and Julian of Norwich. And this book, in a kind of experimental fictional style, follows the lives of these two real historical figures, kind of how they eventually meet. It's a book that is about motherhood and religion and being a woman at a time when women weren't valued, and I thought it was really, really fantastic. It's also very short as well, and for me it packs a punch. It's one of those books that I read in just one sitting, and I really, really enjoyed its themes and its writing style and how these kind of two women's lives just are woven together in a really powerful way. As I said, I have already read this one and I really loved it, so I'm very pleased to see it on this long list. Also, as I said in my predictions video, I very much felt that this was a Walter Scott Prize book, and I feel very proud with myself and my knowledge of reading the Walter Scott Prize over many years that I was right in that. So yes, very excited to see this on the long list, another book I've already read. Then the next book on the list is Music in the Dark by Sally Magnuson, who is a British writer, and this is published by John Murray. And this book is set in 18th and 19th century Scotland and North America. And at the beginning of this book, a woman opens her door to find a stranger there seeking lodgings. He doesn't recognise her, but she recognises him immediately. And this starts her thinking about her past, growing up in the Highlands of Scotland, and specifically about her experiences during the Highland clearances. And the Highland clearances happened from the mid-18th century into the 19th century, and this was when a lot of people were forcibly and often violently evicted from their land, land that often their family and their people had lived on for generations in order to make more space for sheep farms, basically. So this book sounds really, really fascinating to me, and it sounds like it's going to explore a bit of Scottish history that I don't know very much about, and that I think will be really, really interesting. It also sounds like music is going to be a very big theme in this novel. The main character is a songwriter, and obviously the title is Music in the Dark, and music as a theme in literature is something that I really, really love. Coincidentally, I have The Seal Woman's Gift by Sally Magnuson on my TBR, and it's in fact like right at the top of my TBR pile, like it was going to be the next book that I was going to read. However, I'm not sure if I want to read two books by one author like in a row, and I am actually more excited about the premise of Music in the Dark, so I might put The Seal Woman's Gift aside for a little bit, read Music in the Dark first, and then if I love Music in the Dark, I'll be even more excited to pick up The Seal Woman's Gift. I have also just requested a reservation for this book at my library, and yeah, I'm very excited for it. So the next book on the list is Cuddi by Benjamin Myers, who's a British author, and this book is published by Bloomsbury. This is one of the books that I mentioned in my predictions video, so I'm very glad to see that I was right, that it would be on the long list. I haven't read this yet, but I am very, very excited to read it. So this book is an experimental retelling of the story of St Cuthbert, who was an Anglo-Saxon monk. And apparently this novel incorporates prose, poetry, plays, diaries, and real historical accounts, straddling a really, really long period of time in order to explore the story and the legacy of St Cuthbert, and especially kind of how Durham Cathedral ties into that story. Now, I am very, very, very excited for this book. I don't always love experimental fiction, but there are particular kinds of experimental stuff that I do love, and an experimental way of looking at history is something that I really, really enjoy. From what I've heard about Cuddi, I'm kind of really hoping for another News of the Dead by James Robertson, which won the Walter Scott Prize a few years ago and was a real favourite book of mine. And I'm also getting like Overton by Adam Thorpe feels, which is another book that I have really enjoyed. I also went to Durham University, and I've been in Durham Cathedral a lot, and if you go to Durham University and you live for 3 years in Durham, you do end up learning quite a bit about St Cuthbert, because he's just like present as a figure in that part of England. And so I just think I'm really going to enjoy that element of the book as well, and I just think it sounds really great. This is probably like the top book on my reading list. I'm most excited for this one. I just requested a library hold on this, but I think I might also get the audiobook, because I feel like this might be one that would work really well on audiobook if it's very experimental in its form and uses like plays and diaries and poetry and prose and lots of different stuff. Like, I feel like that could work quite well in audiobook. I'm just feeling very excited about Cuddi. Very pleased to see this on this list. The next book on the list is My Father's House by Joseph O'Connor, who's an Irish author, and this is published by Harville Secker. And this book takes place in 1940s Italy, and it's about an Irish priest who makes it his mission to help people escape when the Nazis occupy Rome. This is apparently based on a true story, and the premise sounds really, really interesting to me. I have read one book by Joseph O'Connor before, Ghostlight, which I did really enjoy, but I found it possibly like a little bit more literary than my usual taste, I suppose. But there was a lot in it that interested me, so I am quite keen to read more by Joseph O'Connor. And it's also the Irish Readathon here on BookTube next month in March, so I'm hoping that I will pick this one up for the Irish Readathon next month. Again, I have requested a hold at my library. My library has a lot of the Walter Scott Prize Longlist books this year, which is very exciting. Then next up on the list is The Fraud by Zadie Smith, who is a British author, and this is published by Hamish Hamilton. This book is set in Victorian Britain in 1873, and this book is inspired by the real-life Tichborne trial, which happened in the 1870s in the Victorian period, where somebody claimed to be the missing heir to a baronetcy, but it was ultimately found to have been a fraud. And this book kind of looks over those real historical events, focusing on a Scottish housekeeper who is really, really fascinated by these events and one of the key witnesses in the trial. So I'm quite excited to read this one. I have read two books by Zadie Smith before, White Teeth and On Beauty. I actually quite like Joseph O'Connor. I really enjoyed both of them. And On Beauty especially, I studied at university and got quite a lot out of. But I think Zadie Smith is probably a little bit more literary than my usual taste. I like a little bit more plot and fast paced, I suppose. However, I am really excited to read a historical novel from Zadie Smith. I think that'll be really interesting, and the premise sounds fascinating. This book is one of the longer ones on the list, so whether I'll get to it really soon or not, I'm not sure. But I have put a reservation on it at my library, and I'm excited to read it. Next on this list is Mr. Timeless Blythe by Alan Spence, who is a British writer, and this book is published by Tuttle. And this book is written kind of in the form of a fictional autobiography, following the life of Reginald Horace Blythe, who was a real historical figure, an English writer who focused in his studies on Japanese culture. Blythe was born in Britain, but ended up moving to Japan, married a Japanese woman, and then during the Second World War, he was interned in Japan as an enemy alien. But after the Second World War, he ended up being like a mediator between the imperial household and the occupying American forces. So he sounds like a very interesting man. As someone who is interested in Japanese history, this sounds like a really interesting novel to me. This is not a historical figure that I know anything about, but the novel definitely sounds really interesting. This book is published by an indie press, and again is a little bit harder to get hold of. Can't put a reservation on this one at my library. So this is probably slightly lower down my list than some of the other books on here, but it does sound really interesting. The next book on this list is The House of Doors by Tan Tuan Eng, who is a Malaysian writer, and this book was published by Canongate. And this book is set in 1920s Malaysia, and it follows what happens when the real-life historical figure, the author W. Somerset Maugham, arrives in Penang to stay with two friends of his. And I think it's mostly about the friendship between W. Somerset Maugham and the wife in this couple, and the wife of this couple kind of revealing her secrets to the author W. Somerset Maugham. This sounds like a really interesting novel to me. I've never actually read anything by W. Somerset Maugham, but I do always find books that are about authors quite interesting, and I've heard really, really good things about this book. Especially, I think this book was featured in Roz from Scally Dandling About the Books' like favourite books of the year video, and she just spoke about how much she loved it, so I'm very, very excited to read this one. Also, this is the only book on the long list that my library has on audiobook, and I have already borrowed the audiobook on my phone, so I'll be listening to this one very soon, and I'm really looking forward to it. The next book on the list is In the Upper Country by Kai Thomas, who's a Canadian author, and this book is published by Penguin Canada. This book is set in 19th century Canada, and this book follows two different women, one of whom is an elderly woman who has escaped slavery and come to Canada via the Underground Railroad. She has now been tracked down by a bounty hunter and is in jail, and to this jail comes a young reporter who wants to take her testimony, and these two women end up telling each other their life stories. I think this book sounds fantastic. As with Hungry Ghosts, which I mentioned earlier, this is a book that was on my most anticipated historical fiction for 2023 list that I made. you know, a bit over a year ago, and I haven't yet read it, and it sounds amazing. I would say that this book is very high up on my list, but it's not one I can get through my library, so I'll see where I can get hold of it, but it's definitely one I want to read. It sounds really, really fantastic. Then finally, the last book on the Walter Scott Prize longlist for 2024 is Absolutely and Forever by Rose Tremaine, who is a British author. This is published by Chatto and Windus. This book is set in 1960s London, and as the Walter Scott Prize's definition of historical fiction is 60 years or more ago in the past, this must like just qualify, which I find quite fun. And this book is about first love between two people, Marianne and Simon, who are both in their late teens. Marianne has fallen completely hopelessly for Simon, but he has a secret of some kind. This book is probably like lower down my priority list. I've read one book by Rose Tremaine before, the Gustav Sonata, which wasn't really for me. Again, I think probably slightly more literary than my usual taste. I do have one other book by Rose Tremaine on my TBR, which is called Islands of Mercy, and that one is set at least partly in Victorian Bath, so I think that one is probably the next Rose Tremaine book I will read. Like, I think that's definitely higher up my list. I feel like Absolutely and Forever, I probably won't read now. If it makes the shortlist, I probably will read it, but if it doesn't make the shortlist, then I might not. Saying that, it is one of the shortest books on the long list. It's under 200 pages, so it wouldn't take me very long to read, so maybe I will. My library does have a copy, but I haven't put a hold on it yet. So I'm really excited about this long list. I think it's a great list. We have authors from the UK, Canada, Malaysia, Ireland, New Zealand, and Trinidad and Tobago. We have books set in a range of different countries in a range of different time periods, in I think probably a lot of different forms. Like, I feel like there'll be quite a lot of styles here, which is exciting. So the shortlist will be announced in April, and then the winner will be announced in June. And I've been trying to think about my reading plans for the Walter Scott Prize. I think basically my plan is to read some of the books from the long list in March. I'm probably not going to end up reading any of them in February, unless I really speed through The House of Doors on audiobook, but we'll see. But I think I'll try and read a few of these in March. Then April is going to be dedicated to other reading plans. More on that next week or the week after, probably. And then I'll see what's on the shortlist and read the books that I haven't read from the shortlist in May, ready for the winner to be announced in June. Because I have already read 2 of the books on the 12 book shortlist, I don't think it's infeasible that I could read the whole long list this year, but there are definitely some books that are a lower priority for me than others. I've already put a hold on 5 of these books at the library and got another one out the library on audiobook, so that's a pretty good start. I'm just really excited to get stuck into these books. So that is all I wanted to say for today. Please do let me know if you've read any of these books, if there are any of them that you would especially recommend me to get to. Let me know what you think of the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction's long list this year. And that's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.